What do you do when your husband serves you divorce papers before you even make it back from your girl's trip? When the man you thought you could play outsmarts you completely? I thought I was clever sneaking off to meet my ex. Turns out, my husband had already started building his case. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm not proud of what I did, but if I'm being honest, I didn't see it as cheating when it happened. Not really. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I just wanted to feel something again. Excitement. Attention. That spark I used to have before marriage turned everything into calendars and grocery lists. My name is Iris Vale. I'm 34, and this story started the night I told my husband I needed a break. Not from him exactly, just from being the version of me that everyone expected. The loyal wife, the careful mother, the woman who never stepped out of line. I told him I was going on a simple girls' trip. Sun, wine, and gossip. Nothing more. But that was a lie, and I think some part of me already knew I'd regret it before I even packed my suitcase. Evan, my husband, didn't argue. That was the first warning sign. Usually, he'd at least ask a few questions. Who's going? When are you coming back? Are you sure it's safe? But that night, when I told him Mara had invited me to the coast for the weekend, he just nodded. He said, "You deserve it, Iris. Go clear your head." His calmness annoyed me more than it should have. I wanted a reaction, a sign he still cared enough to fight. Instead, he looked like a man who had already accepted something I hadn't yet admitted. He didn't even look up from the blueprint he was sketching. I remember glancing around our kitchen, the polished counters, the half-drunk cup of coffee, the art projects Lena had left drying on the table. That house used to feel like proof I'd made it. A decent home, a stable husband, a sweet 8-year-old who thought I hung the moon. But lately, all of it just looked like evidence of how ordinary I'd become. Evan and I were living parallel lives, polite, predictable, and quietly distant. He'd talk about work deadlines, and I'd nod while scrolling through my phone. When we did sit together, it was like two co-workers sharing a space, not a couple who used to stay up all night talking about dreams and stupid what-ifs. Then Dylan came back into the picture. He was my ex from college, one of those people who shouldn't matter anymore, but somehow still does. He'd messaged me months earlier, just a friendly, "Hey, long time." I ignored it at first. Then another message came, something about a marketing project he wanted advice on. I told myself replying was harmless. It was just catching up. But every message after that chipped a little piece off my marriage. We started talking more. Late-night texts turned into video calls, and every conversation with him made me feel seen again. He remembered things about me Evan didn't, or maybe Evan just stopped asking. Dylan would say things like, "You still sound like that girl who wanted to move to Italy?" And I'd laugh like it wasn't pathetic to be 34 and still dreaming of running away. Mara, my best friend, didn't help. She was the one who encouraged the girls' trip. "You need fun again," she said. "You've been living like someone's mom, not a person." I knew she didn't mean harm, but her words echoed what I'd been thinking for months. I wanted to feel like me again, the version who wore short dresses without guilt, who flirted without worrying about who might see. I didn't tell her about Dylan at first. I just said I wanted to unplug. She took care of the bookings, a resort by the coast, 3 rooms, ocean view. When she texted me the confirmation, I noticed something strange, the name Dylan Hart on a separate line. My stomach fluttered in that dangerous way I hadn't felt in years. The week before the trip, Evan was quieter than usual. He'd watch me getting ready for work, his eyes unreadable. Once, he asked if I was excited about the weekend, and I said something sarcastic like, "It's just a few days, not a spiritual awakening." He smiled, that patient, restrained smile he uses when he knows I'm being difficult. He's always been calm, too calm sometimes. the kind of man who doesn't raise his voice even when he's hurt. I used to love that about him, his steadiness. Now it just made me feel invisible. The night before I left, I found him in his office surrounded by papers. Legal-looking ones, not his usual architectural plans. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "Just catching up on work." I believed him. Or maybe I didn't want to know. He looked tired but peaceful, and I remember thinking he'd finally accepted that I needed space. I even felt a twisted sense of relief, like maybe I could have both, a husband at home and a taste of my old life on the side. Our daughter Lena was asleep when I kissed her goodbye the next morning. I told Evan I'd text when we arrived. He hugged me, gentle and brief, and said, "Have fun, Iris." His voice sounded strange, final almost. I shrugged it off and left without looking back. The drive with Mara felt like freedom. Music blasting, windows down, her laughter filling the car. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dylan to text that he'd arrived. When he finally did, "Room 214, can't wait to see you." My heart raced like I was 20 again, sneaking out of my dorm. Mara teased me for smiling at my phone. I told her it was a work message. Lying came easier than I expected. That first night at the resort, everything blurred together. Wine, dancing, pretending to be carefree. Mara posted photos of us on her story, me holding a drink, ocean behind us, captioned Freedom Weekend. I laughed when she showed me, but a small voice in my head whispered that maybe Evan would see it. Then again, why should I care? He hadn't checked my stories in months. Later that night, when everyone else went to sleep, I walked down to the beach where Dylan was waiting. It felt surreal, seeing him again after all these years. He looked older, sure, but still had that same grin that made me forget consequences. We talked for hours about nothing important. Old friends, bad movies, life choices. He said he'd always wondered what happened to us. I said we just grew up. He laughed and said, "You don't sound grown up to me." I laughed too, pretending it was a compliment. I didn't go back to my room until nearly dawn. When I walked in, Mara was asleep, and my phone was buzzing with missed calls from an unknown number. I ignored it. Probably a scam, I thought. I didn't realize until later that it wasn't a scam, it was Evan's attorney. The next morning, I woke up feeling both powerful and guilty. I convinced myself it was nothing serious, just a moment of weakness I could tuck away. I even texted Evan a cheerful, "Good morning," like nothing had happened. He replied hours later with a simple, "Hope you're enjoying yourself." No heart emoji. No, "Miss you." Just polite detachment. It stung, but I brushed it off. Mara noticed my mood shift. "You okay?" she asked over breakfast. I told her I was fine, just tired. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're thinking about home again. Stop that. You deserve this." Maybe I wanted to believe her, because I nodded and smiled, pretending the pit in my stomach was just hangover nausea. Looking back, that's when everything was already over. I just hadn't realized it yet. Evan wasn't angry. He wasn't suspicious. He was done. I should have seen it in the way he let me go so easily, the way he didn't call that night to check in. I thought his silence meant trust. It meant he'd already started erasing me from his life. By the time I came home 2 days later, the house didn't feel like mine. His things were there, but the energy was different. Colder. The framed wedding photo that used to sit on his desk was gone. In its place, a neat stack of folders. And when I opened them later, I'd learned the truth. Evan hadn't been working late those nights. He'd been meeting with lawyers. He'd known about Dylan. He'd been preparing for my absence before I even packed my bag. But that's another part of the story. The part where pretending not to care becomes impossible. The part where I finally understood what it means when someone decides to stop fighting for you, not with shouting or tears, but with silence and paperwork. And the worst part? I can't even say I didn't deserve it. If you asked me back then, I'd have said Evan and I were fine. Boring maybe, but fine. We had our routines, Our inside jokes, our quiet evenings that looked perfect from the outside. I used to post photos of our dinners, our family hikes, our matching Christmas pajamas, and people would comment, "You two are couple goals." I liked that image. It made me feel like I'd done something right with my life. But the truth was, I'd been living off appearances for a long time. Evan is one of those good men people write essays about. He's patient, stable, loyal to a fault. The kind of man who shows up early to everything and double checks if you lock the door. When we first met, that steadiness was everything I wanted. After years of dating men who came and went like storms, Evan felt like solid ground. He built a life around me with quiet devotion, birthday breakfasts, surprise flowers on Wednesdays, the little heart he'd draw on our grocery list. For years, I thought that was enough. But then one day, I looked at him and felt nothing. Not hate, not anger. Just an unbearable quiet. Like we'd run out of things to say. I remember one morning in particular. I was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through old photos on my phone. Evan and me at the lake, me pregnant with Lena, our first Christmas in the house. I didn't delete them, but I didn't smile either. He came in, kissed my forehead, and started making coffee. I asked him if he'd noticed how different we'd become. He said, "Different how?" And I couldn't even explain it. It wasn't that he'd done something wrong, he just wasn't new anymore. Around that time, Dylan started messaging me again. He was my college boyfriend, the kind of man who could make a sentence sound like a secret. He'd always been reckless, confident in that infuriating way that makes you feel small and wanted at the same time. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years when his message popped up. "You ever miss the old days?" I should have ignored it. I didn't. One message turned into 2, then 100. I'd sit in meetings at work smiling at my phone like an idiot. It was stupid, I know, but those messages made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. He asked if I was happy. I said yes, of course. I was married. He wrote back, "That's not what I asked." I didn't answer, but the question stuck in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Evan noticed something was off, but didn't press. He never does. When I started dressing differently, staying up late on my phone, coming home later than usual, he didn't accuse me of anything. He just watched quietly. One night he asked if I still wanted to go on the girls' trip Mara and I had talked about. I said yes without hesitation. He just nodded. No argument, no guilt. That should have scared me, but it didn't. I told myself it meant he trusted me. Really, it meant he'd stopped trying. The week before I left, we had dinner at my parents' house. My mom joked that Evan spoiled me too much. I laughed and said something stupid like, "He tries, but I keep him busy." Everyone laughed. Evan smiled politely but didn't join in. Later in the car, he said, "You like embarrassing me lately, don't you?" I rolled my eyes, told him to stop being sensitive. He didn't reply. He just drove in silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel. I stared out the window and thought about Dylan. Mara was thrilled about the trip. She said we needed a reset. I agreed, though my reset had a different purpose. I booked an extra day at the resort without telling her. I told Evan it was because the flights were cheaper that way. In reality, it was for Dylan. He said he'd be nearby for work. "Maybe we could catch up," he'd written. I said, "Maybe." I should have said no. The night before I left, Evan was in his study surrounded by papers. I asked if he'd miss me. He said, "You deserve a break." His voice was so calm it irritated me. I wanted him to question me, to demand I stay, to prove I still mattered. Instead, he gave me permission. That was when I realized I could do anything, and he wouldn't stop me. When I kissed Lena goodbye that morning, she clung to me longer than usual. She asked if Daddy could come too. I told her it was just for the girls. She looked disappointed. Evan smiled at her, then looked at me and said, "Be safe." Not, "Have fun," not, "Miss you." Just be safe. Like he already knew I wasn't coming back the same. As I drove away, I checked my phone. Dylan had texted, "See you soon." My stomach twisted, half guilt, half excitement. Mara was blasting music beside me, laughing, shouting that this was going to be the best weekend ever. I laughed too, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, something heavy was shifting, like the moment before a storm when the air goes still. If I'd looked back, maybe I would have noticed the way Evan was standing in the doorway watching me leave. Maybe I would have seen the envelope in his hand, the one he'd already signed. But I didn't. I just drove off toward the coast, convinced I was about to find myself. I didn't realize I was already losing everything. When I came home from the trip, everything looked exactly the same, but it felt wrong. The lights were on, the shoes lined up neatly by the door, the scent of Evan's coffee still lingering in the air. But there was something off, something cold about the space. I called out his name the way I always did. No answer. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table, reading. He looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Hey, you're back." Like I was some guest dropping by unexpectedly. I laughed a little, trying to shake off the awkwardness. I said I was exhausted, that the trip had been amazing, that I'd brought him something from the resort shop. He nodded and asked how Mara was, how the weather was, how I was feeling. Everything about his tone was polite, too polite. I kept waiting for him to ask if I missed him, but he didn't. His calmness unnerved me more than any argument could have. I went upstairs to unpack and found the first clue. The picture of us from our anniversary, the one that always sat on his nightstand, was gone. In its place was a stack of documents, neatly clipped together. My stomach twisted. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I threw my suitcase on the bed and told myself I was imagining things. When I came back downstairs, Evan was washing dishes. I asked if everything was okay. He said, "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" I laughed, nervous, and said he seemed different. He looked at me for a long moment before replying, "I guess we both are." I didn't know what to say to that. Lena came running in from the living room and hugged me tight. She said she missed me so much it hurt. I told her I'd missed her too. Then she looked up at me and asked, "Mom, why did Daddy move his clothes?" My heart dropped. I looked over her head at Evan, but he didn't react. He just kept drying a plate. I told her he was just organizing things. She seemed satisfied with that answer and ran off again. I wanted to scream. Dinner was silent. I tried to fill the quiet with stories about the trip, funny moments with Mara, a joke about getting sunburned, but Evan barely responded. I told him he was being distant. He said he was tired. I told him I missed him. He said, "That's nice." My throat tightened. Halfway through, the doorbell rang. Evan stood up calmly and said, "I'll get it." A courier was standing there with a thick envelope. He signed for it without hesitation, then handed it to me. "This came for you," he said, and went back to his seat. I thought it was something from work, maybe a late delivery from the trip. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it. The first page had my name in bold letters. The words, "Notice of Separation." Proceedings jumped out at me before I could even process the rest. My mouth went dry. I flipped through the pages. Financial statements, property details, attached screenshots of text messages, photos of me and Dylan on the beach. The photos were grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Me in that sundress. Dylan's hand on my arm, my laugh frozen mid-betrayal. I looked up at Evan, my heart pounding. He didn't look angry. He looked finished. I said, "What is this?" He said, "You should read it." I said it was ridiculous, that it wasn't what it looked like. He said, "It's exactly what it looks like." His calmness made me panic. I started talking too fast. How it was just a coincidence. How people take photos out of context. How Mara posted things without asking. He didn't argue. He just listened like someone already closing a door. I accused him of invading my privacy. He said, "You posted half of it yourself." I told him he was blowing everything out of proportion, that one weekend didn't erase years of marriage. He said quietly, "It didn't erase it. You did." Lena came back into the room just then, asking if she could have dessert. Evan smiled at her, gentle, normal, like nothing had happened. I told her I wasn't hungry. Evan said, "That's okay, sweetie. I'll get you something." I sat there in silence, holding the envelope, feeling the room close in around me. When she went upstairs again, I tried one last time. I said we could fix this. He shook his head. "I already tried fixing things," he said. "You just weren't paying attention." Then he stood up, collected his plate, and walked out of the room. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers spread across the table. My own name looked strange in legal print. The sound of water running in the kitchen felt distant, almost unreal. By the time I finally moved, the only thought in my head was that this couldn't be real. He wouldn't actually go through with it. He was calm, sure, but he loved me. Didn't he? I gathered the papers into a pile and shoved them into my bag, as if hiding them could make them less true. Upstairs, I found the empty space on his nightstand again, and for the first time, I noticed something else missing: his wedding ring. The mark it left on the wood was faint, but clear. That's when it hit me. The envelope wasn't a threat. It was a farewell. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Evan's side of the bed was cold, untouched. I went downstairs expecting to find him making coffee like always, but the kitchen was spotless, too neat. No mug, no toast crumbs, no sound of the kettle. I stood there in my robe, holding my phone, waiting for him to appear. He didn't. His car was gone from the driveway. My first instinct was to call him, but when I did, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I texted, "We need to talk." Then, "Please come home." Then finally, "I think you're overreacting." None of them delivered. I told myself it was a signal issue, but deep down, I knew he'd blocked me. By noon, I was pacing the living room, my heart pounding. The envelope sat on the coffee table where I'd left it. I opened it again, this time slower, reading every word. It wasn't just a separation notice. It was a plan. Evan had already met with lawyers, divided assets, even listed a schedule for Lena's custody. He'd written everything out like a blueprint, the same precision he used in his work. I realized he'd been preparing this for weeks, maybe months. I called Mara, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. I told her he'd flipped out over some old photos and was trying to punish me. She gasped and said, "You're kidding, right? Over one little trip?" I said exactly. That's what I'd been saying. She told me I needed to calm down, that men get dramatic when their pride's hurt. "He'll come around," she said. "They always do." That gave me enough confidence to post something online, a photo from the trip, me smiling with a glass of wine, captioned, "Sometimes you just need to breathe." I wanted him to see it, to feel guilty for overreacting. Instead, the comments filled up with quiet judgment. People said things like, "Hope you're okay," and "Rough week." It wasn't support. It was pity. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called, his mother. Her voice was tight, polite. She asked if I was at home. I said yes, trying to sound casual. She told me Evan was staying with her for now. My stomach dropped. "He told you?" I asked. She said, "He told me enough." Then, softer, "You should let him breathe, Iris." I started to explain, to tell her it was a misunderstanding, but she interrupted gently, "I don't think it was." And then she hung up. I sat on the couch, staring at the phone, furious. He'd run to his mother instead of talking to me? Fine. If he wanted to play this cold and civilized, I could play colder. I opened my messages again and sent him one last text. "You can't just disappear. We have a child. Be an adult and talk to me." It didn't deliver. That night, I poured myself a drink and drafted a long message to our mutual friends. I told them Evan had blindsided me, that he'd been distant for months, and now he was trying to paint me as unfaithful just because I took a trip. I said he was acting unstable, paranoid. It felt satisfying, writing it, like reclaiming control of the story. Mara read it before I sent it and said, "Honestly, you sound like the sane one. Send it." So I did. By morning, I regretted it. 2 people had already left the group chat. Another sent me a private message saying, "Maybe lay low for a bit, this looks messy." I deleted the post, but it was too late. The whispers had started. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. But it wasn't Evan. It was a new number. A man introduced himself as his attorney. He said Evan preferred all communication go through legal channels now, especially regarding Lena. His tone was professional, detached, but it felt like a knife. I asked what that even meant, and he said, "You'll receive formal instructions regarding visitation." Then he added, "Please refrain from contacting Mr. Vale directly." I hung up, shaking. I called Mara again, my voice breaking this time. I said he was turning everyone against me. She told me to stay calm, that maybe he just needed space to make his point. "Men love their pride," she said. "He'll come crawling back once he realizes what he's lost." But that evening, when I went to the bank to check our account, the app wouldn't let me in. "Access restricted," it said. The joint account was frozen. I tried the credit card. Declined. The panic hit full force then. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was shutting me out completely. I drove to his office, ignoring Mara's advice to play it cool. I needed to see him, to make him look me in the eye and explain. When I arrived, the receptionist looked uncomfortable. She said Mr. Vale was in a meeting. I said I'd wait. After 20 minutes, 2 men from security approached. One of them handed me a folded note. It was from Evan. 4 words, written in his precise handwriting. All communication through counsel. I tried to laugh it off, told the guards it was ridiculous, that this was my husband. They didn't care. They just escorted me out, gently but firmly. I could feel people in the lobby staring. I wanted to scream that he was the one being unreasonable, that I was the victim here, but the words caught in my throat. When I got home that night, the silence was unbearable. No sound from upstairs, no clinking of his mug, no smell of fresh coffee. Just the echo of everything he'd taken with him. I looked around at the house that still looked perfect, like a model home, every trace of him carefully removed. That was when I finally understood what kind of revenge he'd chosen. Not anger, not shouting, just removal, erasure. He'd made sure my world stayed exactly the same, only now it was empty. The next few days passed in a fog of denial. I kept waiting for Evan to change his mind, to show up at the door and say this had all gone too far. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. It never was. Instead, there were messages from lawyers, documents, deadlines, signatures. All cold, all business. I told myself he was bluffing, that once the anger faded, he'd remember what we'd built together. But when I saw his name on the paperwork beside the words, Petitioner, Evan Vale, I realized there was no bluff. He was done. On the 3rd day, I went to his mother's house. I told myself it was to see Lena. She was staying there for the week. But really, I wanted to face him. Evelyn opened the door, polite but distant. She said Evan wasn't home, that he'd gone to a meeting. I asked if I could come in anyway. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Lena ran to me, all smiles, holding a drawing. It was of our family, except she'd drawn 2 houses. I asked about it. She said Daddy helped her make it. "One for you, one for me," she said proudly. I almost laughed, but it came out as a sob. Evelyn put a hand on my shoulder. "She's handling it better than you think," she said softly. I wanted to scream that I wasn't the one who broke her world apart, that Evan was the one dividing it up like property. but even I couldn't say it out loud. Before I left, Evelyn handed me an envelope. She said, "Evan wanted you to have this." Inside were printouts, screenshots of messages, timestamps, bank statements, evidence. There were my texts with Dylan, the hotel booking confirmation, the photo of us at dinner, each one neat, dated, undeniable. My chest tightened. "He's building a case against me?" I asked. Evelyn looked away. "He's protecting himself," she said. I left, shaking. By the time I reached my car, anger had replaced the guilt. I told myself this was revenge, not justice. He was humiliating me to make himself look like a saint. He wanted everyone to see me as the villain so he could play the calm, wounded hero. I called Mara again, ranting. She said, "You need to go talk to him, not through lawyers. Face him like an adult." So I did. The next morning, I went straight to his lawyer's office. The receptionist looked startled when I announced who I was. She told me to wait. After a few minutes, Evan walked in. He looked different. Collected, rested, wearing a crisp gray suit. I stood up, ready to speak first, but he beat me to it. "You shouldn't be here, Iris," he said quietly. I told him this was ridiculous, that we could work it out if he'd just talk to me privately. He shook his head. "There's nothing left to work out." I said he was being cruel, that this wasn't like him. He replied, "You stopped knowing what I was like a long time ago." His voice didn't rise once. That infuriated me more than if he'd yelled. I said he was turning Lena against me. He said, "No, I'm making sure she grows up in peace." I said he couldn't just erase me from her life. He sighed, pulled a folder from his bag, and slid it across the table. Inside were visitation terms, reasonable, detailed, and painfully formal. He'd thought of everything. When I accused him of spying, he didn't flinch. "You left everything in the open, Iris. The phone, the emails, the photos. You wanted to be caught." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He was right, and I hated that he was right. Then he said the line that broke me. "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it to protect myself and Lena from the person you've become." I tried to cry, to appeal to his empathy. I said it was a mistake, that I'd been confused, that Dylan meant nothing. He said, "I know. That's the point." His calm made the room feel smaller, suffocating. I reached across the table, desperate, but he stood before I could touch him. "My lawyer will handle the rest," he said, and walked out. Evelyn came into the office moments later, apparently waiting nearby. I demanded to know if she'd put him up to this. She said no, that he'd made up his mind weeks ago. "He was waiting to see if you'd choose differently," she said. "But you didn't." I left before I started crying again. In the parking lot, I sat in the car and opened the folder he'd given me. It wasn't just visitation terms. It was everything. Division of assets, joint custody plan, even the transfer of the house title. He'd already filed it. My name was being removed from the property. The home I'd decorated, the place where I'd raised our child, was gone from my name in a line of legal print. I drove aimlessly after that, ending up near the coast, the same road I'd taken to see Dylan. It hit me then, the symmetry of it all. The first trip was about escape. This one was about consequence. By the time I got home that evening, a new email was waiting from Evan's attorney confirming the filings were complete. It ended with a single sentence. "Mr. Vale wishes you well as you move forward." I stared at that line for a long time. Not cruel, not emotional, just final. I thought lawful revenge would look like drama, like shouting or betrayal. But it doesn't. It looks like silence, signatures, and doors closing without a sound. I moved back into my parents' house the following week. My mother tried to make it seem temporary, setting up the guest room with clean sheets and a candle that smelled like home. My father barely spoke to me, just nodded when I passed him in the hallway. Every sound in that house felt too loud. The television, the ticking clock, The way I kept unlocking my phone to stare at an empty message screen. Evan hadn't contacted me once. Mara stopped by with coffee one morning, but even she looked uneasy. She said people were talking, that Evan had handled everything so maturely, and that no one really knew what to say to me. "You should stay offline for a while," she advised. I laughed bitterly. "Why? Let them judge. They already picked their hero." She didn't answer. By the time she left, I knew she was done taking sides. I tried to keep busy, helping my mother around the house, scrolling job listings, pretending I still had some kind of direction. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Evan's face in that office, calm, final, untouchable. I replayed our last conversation 100 times, trying to find a moment where I could have changed the ending. There wasn't one. Lena called once, from Evelyn's phone. She told me she missed me, but that Daddy said we'd see each other soon. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, like she'd already adjusted to the new routine. I told her I loved her, that everything would be okay. When she hung up, I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since all of it began. Not angry tears, not dramatic ones, just quiet, tired crying that wouldn't stop. That evening, a courier came again, another envelope, smaller this time. Inside was a single page. Evan's lawyer had finalized the transfer of the house, confirmed our custody arrangement, and noted that all accounts were officially separated. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was one short message. "The lawyer will handle everything. Take care of yourself." I read it over and over until the words blurred. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't warm, either. It was just done. A life summarized in legal language and 4 detached sentences. I thought about calling him just once more to say sorry, to beg him to talk to me, not even to come back, just to speak. But I didn't, because I knew what he'd do. He'd stay silent. And somehow that silence would hurt more than any argument ever could. Later that night, I opened my phone and scrolled through the photos from the trip, the beach, the drinks, the fake smiles. I reached the one of me laughing with Dylan, sunlight on my face, my wedding ring still on my hand. I stared at it until the screen went dark. That's how it ended. Not with a fight, not with a confession. Just a quiet realization that by sunrise, I'd traded everything real for a few moments that didn't mean anything. And the worst part was knowing Evan's revenge had been nothing more than peace. Peace I could never have again. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.